There's a master plan. It's the mobility and transport strategy, which gives a vision until the year of 2025. And here are the three, I would say, major goals. You can see they want to reduce the CO2 emissions by 20% till 2025. It's all related to the transport sector of the city of Vienna. They want to reduce the energy consumption by minus 20%, and to come to the behavior of the people, of the Vienna citizens. They want to have an amount of 80% using bicycle, walking and public transport, and only 20% of people inside Vienna city should use their car by 2025. So these are the goals. You see the current, more or less, it's 2012. The current situation, we have 27% of people, Vienna people, who use their cars for trips inside Vienna. So there is no, this gives no information about the commuting about the commuters and their model share and their means of transportation. So if you take a look at the commuter perspective, and this is also the great challenge in the next decades, about 70% of people who come from the surroundings and the suburbs of Vienna inside the city use the car. So there we have a complete different behavior in using modes of transportation. But these are the goals for the trips inside Vienna of Viennese people. So 80% should use or should use public, should walk or should use public transport. So what are the key aspects inside this mobility strategy? And I give some of these key aspects or keywords here to you. So there should be more space for pedestrians and bicycle. This subsumized under the aspect of active mobility. They should extend, there should be an extension of the public transport network. I would give you some hints, 2 or 3 slides after that, what that means in detail. There should be a very sharp view on a sharing concept. So car and bike sharing concept should be established and enabled. The aspects of multimodality, mobility points, so access points where you can get access to these sharing concepts, car sharing, bike sharing, and also the supplement of technological systems, so usage of apps and all this stuff. Traffic safety is also a key aspect, Vision Zero as a buzzword, or also cargo transport. I made here a question sign because this is very it's a very brief chapter, and it's only not described in detail. So if I take a review, if I review the transport strategy of the city of Vienna, you could say there are a lot of keywords, but, and this is also the challenge for the next years, to work on a detailed, concrete process to implement these strategies, or to implement and describe concrete processes for these goals. And we also know in Vienna we have problems in praxis. I asked the question, who plans the planning? So who is responsible for the planning and for the difference between planning and what it looks like when it's realized? This is also one of the problems, because a lot of people are involved in a good, in Vienna in this process. There is also, Volker Schaffler also said it, Smart City Vienna Framework Strategy. It's a vision for 2050, so 25 years later, but it also gives some hints to, in a timeline in between. So for 2030, they say we should reduce the motorized individual traffic of Viennese people inside Vienna to 15%, and 2050 markedly less than 15%. So you see 25, 20%, 2030, 15%, and 2050 markedly less than 15%. So this means an enormous strength for all these measurements and the implementation of these measurements. But it's also a clear goal for a resource conserving mobility. And this is one goal for the passenger traffic across the boundaries, municipal boundaries of Vienna, the reduction of the energy by 10% in 2030. So you see, not so strict goals. There are great challenges, and they also know that a lot of problems occur about planning in Lower Austria and about the settlements and the problems of building motorways and so on in the surroundings of Vienna in the next few years, what Hermann Knoflacher also said. One or a few of these measurements, how should these goals be reached? What should be done? Parking organization. These are not only measurements that are described in the strategy, but also measurements that I analyzed and that I think that are necessary to reach these goals I showed you before. So one of the key elements is the parking organization, the organization of the parking places. One of the strategies should be no parking on the surface. Of course, we have to use public space for other purposes. A reduced number of parking places dictated by law, and a spatial distance between living, working, shopping, etc., and parking. So one of the problems today occurs because we connect all our living, working, shopping, and so on with the car in our direct surrounding. As a result, we also want to implement a lot more of car-free urban quarters. That's also similar to a lot of other cities across Europe. And where the keyword of human scale also occurred, and Professor Knoflacher mentioned it, and qualities. That's a question: how do we measure qualities? What are qualities? And of course, the distribution of space, reducing car mobility, all these stuffs will follow us in the next years. If we take a look at other cities, because I was also asked to show you briefly how other cities deal with these goals. They also have similar strategies. They all want to reduce car traffic. They have to reduce car traffic, of course, because of environmental goals they have to reach, also because of climate change and so on. Paris has very good measurements. They do a lot of restrictions for car traffic. They roll out a very, very dense bike and car sharing system across the city. They do a lot of pedestrianization. They focus on new tramway lines. So they also implement new public transport lines. But on the contrary to Vienna, they focus on public transport on the surface. So in the public space. London also does a lot of restrictions the last years. They have the congestion charge, as you know. There, of course, are these two cities which enormously focus on cycling, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, of course. And there's also Barcelona. They have a concept which is called super blocks, which is quite interesting. I will show you a picture afterwards. What that does mean. In France, you see one of the good examples how they deal with implementing public transport strategies in combination with the historical city centers. So it's a complete different approach to Vienna, because they say, okay, we don't have to implement here safety measures, and we have to protect the people, but it's one place. And the people can move here, and the tramway line is crossing. Also, the design of the public transport is symbiotic somehow to the history of the cities and so on. And you see, they also often use these lawn rails where they bring some green back in the public space of these cities. In comparison, you see, city of Vienna, we have also a lot of tram lines. And there's a complete different approach. So there's a lot of enormous potential for a transformation also of the public space and the city area. This is a short schematic graph for the superblock strategy in Barcelona. So they have, this is all buildings or more buildings summarized in a block. So it's somehow similar to the Gründerzeitviertel in Vienna. you know, inside the belt or near the belt. In former times, every street here was open for cars, and the cars drove in all these small streets. And they said, well, we do not have to use this very dense grid for car, but we have to use it, have to open it for cycling, and we have to use it, of course, for the pedestrians. So they said, okay, we'll kick out these points and just make access points for cars in a wider grid, and to make somehow a pedestrianization area, do some pedestrianization inside these squares. So they summarized and reduced the access points for cars inside these blocks, which could also be an interesting strategy, I think, for Vienna, because we have similar problems with the small streets inside these so-called Gründerzeitviertels. And we have a similar grid. So finally, of course, there is a transformation of public space. And if we go back in the, let's say, 1930s or 1920s, in the last century, then the public space was occupied by the kids. So if we have a viewer, if we have to want to implement a vision, and Hermann Knofler also mentioned the children and their perspective of the city, then we see how the transformation or the occupation of public space by cars has transformed the usage of public space in the last decades. So today, this area is technically deformed, it's disciplined, the children are suppressed, it's restricted, they're displaced, they're caged, so on. So that's how we deal with this public space today. And it's also a question of values, of the values of the society, of course. Because if we implement these barriers in our streets, and only if they are 20 centimeters or so on, or 3 centimeters could be a barrier, then we, of course, we produce problems in the city. And we, of course, increase the speed of the car traffic going across to the possibility for the children. So if the street design looks like this in new built areas, of course, then, and you compare it with the needs of the children, then we have a problem, of course, because we have a huge and enormous amount of paved areas. You see, they could deal with every technical detail that's also all solved, but we have the cars outside, we have a very broad lane, and so on. And these are also pictures from Vienna. You see flooding, I think it was 2003 or 2005, in the Lerchenfelder Street, in the 7th district, and 8th district. So, of course, if you have a lot of sealed surface, and climate change was a topic also today, then we have to also deal with the results in the cities. And the question is, how can we deal with that? Of course, when the surface looks like this, we have a problem. And in former times, the surface looked like this. If you cut out this area and you go inside or deeper in the surface, then you realize that beyond we can see this cobblestones pavement, which was common in Vienna over decades. And there was an analysis by the BOKU, and they analyzed how much plants, different species of plants were inside these cobblestones, and you see there were 15 species of plants only in between. So we could also design our lanes like this, also in the new districts, and make new qualities. This is a typical street, small street in Paris, so with a lot of greening, and you see there is no different declination of what is the lane and where should park the car, but natural elements make the boundaries where you can drive or where you can park. So also maybe take into account this avenue in its original meaning, to make the city greener, to plant a lot of trees, not only every 20 meters, but so that you have a complete shadow area for walking, especially if you take a look outside in these days. How is it solved in Vienna? These places where people want to sit down, where could be recreation areas, we have their parking cars. So that's a real problem. But there are differences in when I look to other cities, but also we have also good examples in Vienna how these places could look like. Of course, Carfree settlements like in Vauban in Germany is a typical example for that. I did a paper some years ago, it was called Resizing the City, and of course maybe we could also think about this, and these strategies are more and more coming into the cities, buzzword urban gardening, of de-urbanization of cities. We're always talking about the urbanization trends and so on, but you see they are also imaginable, and they are imaginable of course in a small scale, but they are inside the cities already. So the cultivation and the issues like self-growing of food products and so on. A few years ago that was relatively new. It's more and more common. It's becoming more and more common in the last decades. But these small elements also implemented in the city, they show also the needs of the people to have a contact to nature. Public transport is not always equal to public transport. You see here public transport infrastructure for underground, which is not under the ground, but it's also for the underground U-Bahn in Vienna on the surface. So it's a complete different infrastructure as you compare it to a tramway system, which adopts very, very good to the human scale infrastructure also, we talked about before. So there are a few elements, of course, that should be focused on. In Vienna, there were a lot of transformation issues, projects for transformation, a lot of projects for transformation of public space, a lot of measurements were implemented. You see here some examples. I showed you the same position before in the, I don't know when it was somewhere in the 70s, and then afterwards, also Lugeg, you know, here in the first districts, looking, that's how it looks today. And of course, more and more examples or more and more possibilities for the people to use temporarily the public space for their needs, for public viewing, especially in the summer months. In Paris, this was also very common in the last years, to close in every district a few roads for the cars, to open it for the people so they can use, let's say, between July and September, some streets inside their district, inside their living area for their purposes. Yeah, you see that people sit outside and behind the commercial for free parking in the garages. But people park outside, of course, because it's much more cheaper. And we talked about the ground floor also today, maybe some pictures to this topic. So you see if the ground floor is looking like this, you have enormous problem of making a vital, a human scale city, because nobody wants to sit outside. And of course it's a question of architecture. You see, if you have a house designed like this, and somewhere there's the place for the children to play. You see, I call it's architecture for the car in the cellar. So, because how long do you want to sit here, or how long do you want to stay if this is the background? It's a living building, so it's not, I don't know, an office or something like that. And of course, if this is the public space look like, then you have a problem. Okay. I hope I could give you a short overview about the vision, about the situation right now, and about the problems also focusing Vienna and similar to a lot of other cities in Europe, but not only Europe, across the world. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much, Harald. This was really interesting insights, and I think we could see that there is a sort of a gap between the wish to change Vienna, but then like where do we actually, or what do we actually do on the ground? And this is also what we want to answer with this project. We want to create new ideas, and so like kind of like detached from the daily business ideas that could catalyze new approaches in Vienna. I was actually really interested in your one of the black and white slides. There was this guy doing something on the street. It was like holding himself with a pole on the street and like having the feet up. Mm-hmm. I don't know what was that, but it made me think about something I was just recently at a conference about public space, and one of the one of the main themes running through it was that it's really important for us to be able to design for the unexpected, for the informal in cities, for the unregulated, and just to allow things. So this is either some sort of martial arts, or I don't know what's happening, but I think it's pretty interesting. And this is also what brings me to my question now for you is, are we, from a traffic planning perspective, should we be doing, because also Hermann Knofler said that before, that we actually should be redesigning the cities if we want to solve the traffic problem. The traffic engineers as such will not solve it maybe. So is the goal to design such high quality cities that a lot of long distance trips change back to like very short trips and you just go to the community garden or somewhere? I mean, what's the easy answer to that?
I don't have the slide inside, but what I was searching about was a picture of an old historical city center without transport problems. So a lot of the transport problems we were discussing today and a lot of issues concerning the transformation of the cities are focusing on a design or design elements of a cities beginning at the 50s or 60s. So also always with the background of the car in the brain of the planners. So a lot of problems occurred when the traditional transport planning began. Because before the transport planners came in the city, there was no transport problem. So we have to also to question if the transport planners, although they have a new, more or less, not more so traditionally focused education, if they're capable to solve the transport problems and as a result, the design problems of the city. Because, as I give you an example, I was at a round table at the city of Vienna. We were talking about the development area in the 3rd district, Eurogate. And we're talking about the school campus there, which is interesting discussion about centralization and decentralization, talking about school campus. Anyway, and he said the first street, the first small street as an entrance to this quartier is a result, or the distance is a result of the congestion length in year 2025. So he calculated, based on some prognosis data of car traffic, a congestion length beginning at the the crossing with a signalized crossing, calculated the distance, which was 66 meters, and said, well, if I calculate, then there can be the first street for this new quartier, for this new district. So you see what the planning principles are in detail. So I would never think about that, because if we would have a street grid calculated by congestion length, okay, our city would like completely different. I mean, you would have no historical city centers, or on the contrary, you have to remove the complete historical city centers. So this is the problem. We built, or we are planning cities based on the car data, and we do not say what the people want. And okay, if I give the possibility for 30-meter congestion lengths, okay, then I will have 30 meters. If I give the possibilities for 0-meter congestion lengths, because I forbid the entrance of cars, then I will have 0 meters congestion lengths. But I could not build cities which last at least 60, 70, 80 years, or should last this period, based on car congestion lengths. So this is, to my point of view, a terrible example of how city planning in detail, in praxis, is handled today, and it's completely different. It has nothing to do with these beautiful buzzwords we are talking about in the strategies and vision. Because if these very, very technical and car-oriented planners sit and make the suggestion, we have a problem. And there is, of course, this problem between what we really want, what the vision is, which sounds good, which is common to a lot of other cities, and what is done in praxis. And we have to solve this problem, and this is, I think, a huge work and enormous exercise for the next 10, 15 years to build or to make processes where that is not possible. But where we have a concrete goal and say, okay, this is the direction.
Yes, but I also want some other questions or remarks, if somebody has one. Can you please, because we need to speak in the mic to be able to record it.
So one question just, what went wrong then in Aspern? It's a new development, and I mean the housing is interesting, and they built the U2 line first, and then came the housing and all that stuff. But the first pictures you see maybe you had one in your slides. You see the cars, the street space. It's totally traditional and in no way innovative. And I mean, this district is going to be finished in like 20 years or something, and it's outdated now. You know, I mean, what process went wrong there, or how could this be? Because the city seems to be very interested in new initiatives and new ways of thinking, and so
they tried to implement some measurements with this Sammelgaragen, so with this centralized parking possibilities. Of course, if this works, then they can reduce the parking places at the surroundings, at the surface. But you're completely right. If I walk through Aspern, also through the small streets where we have pedestrian area, then we have parking, then we have a lane, then we have parking, and then pavement. So that's 20, 30 years too late. So as you mentioned, in 20, 30, 40 years, that's not a visionary project. Although it's not a visionary project today. Because if it would be a visionary project, then a lot of people would say, from all over the world, and say, wow, we couldn't have done that in our city. So it's not an experiment, but they have done what they know or what they knew that is possible. And this is one of the great problems. They always say which is really possible, which could be done from their point of view, but not from a point of view, let's say, of designers or people who look like, who have a perspective of 30, 40, 50, 60 years, because then it would have to look completely different. And what I have a problem with the density, of course, there. We're always talking about density, and density is necessary for public transport and so on. And you know these correlations and diagrams between density and energy amount, usage, and so on. But there's also a relation between highness of the building, the amount of level of the buildings, and the public space in between of the buildings. And that doesn't fit to this human scale, to my point of view, because they're very high, the buildings, 7, 8 levels, and then the public area space is very, very dense in comparison. So it's I have no good feeling when I go through the Aspern station, but maybe it's very individual. Although they have some elements which are quite good, I would say, the recreation areas and the design of the lake, the small lake, and so on. But I wouldn't give a concrete, I don't know. I can't say how it will look like in 30, 40 years. So when it's done and when the people live there, let's say for 5 or 10 years and so on. I'm not quite sure, but of course it could have been done better. You're quite right there.